sitting CEOs need to do a couple of things. And the most important is only do things that you can do. Things that other people in your organization could do, you need to trust those people and hand those things off and let them do that thing. And it's interesting because, you asked about what holds people back. What might hold them back is trust or the fear of giving up the thing they love. Like my transition going from, sort of the singles tennis player to this team, managing a team. But the other side that she said that I thought was really interesting, but don't give up the one thing that you really love, because that's what energizes you. That's what keeps you waking up every morning. That's what gets you fired up to be in this business. Mm-hmm. And that, for me, that's leasing. So, I preside over the deal committee to the extent that I can be helpful for the leasing team. I'm here at ICSC sitting in on leasing meetings. I've said to our investment group, guys, you guys can have your investor meetings over here, but this is a leasing meeting. ICSC is about leasing, as far as I'm concerned. I'm going to stay as connected to leasing as I can because that's my roots, that's my heritage, that's where I come from. But I'm also going to be able to stay out in front of our business where I need to be because I have the trust of the team that we've built here, that they're going to run with the things that I know that they're going to specialize in.
Welcome, everybody, to the Matthews Mentality Podcast. On today's episode, we have Stephen Yalof, who's the president and CEO of Tanger. Is Tanger or Tanger Outlets?
It's Tanger. We dropped the outlets.
Yeah, Tanger. I was going to say, when I was coming up in the business, it was Tanger Outlets, but Tanger, where he leads an extraordinary team focused on using customer insights to shape the future of shopping. If you're listening, there's almost a 100% probability you have shopped at a Tanger property. I know I have. With 38 outlet centers, 3 lifestyle centers, and an adjacent grocery-anchored strip center across the U.S. and Canada, Tanger is redefining the retail experience by delivering unmatched value, experiences, and opportunities for communities, stakeholders, and partners. He spent his entire career at the intersection of retail and real estate. What ICSC? Oh, for the audience right now, if you hear a little background noise, we are at the ICSC show in beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada. What show is this for you?
30.
Oh, you got me. I think this is 21 or 22 for me. Been coming to the same party for years, holding leadership roles at iconic brands like Ralph Lauren and Gap, previously serving as a CEO of Simon Premium Outlets, where he spearheaded expansion and portfolio growth. In addition to his corporate leadership, Stephen is a trustee of the ICSC. We were at the dinner Saturday night?
I missed the dinner.
I was there. It was a great dinner.
I was at the Grateful Dead.
Serves on you were at the Dead, yeah. The Grateful Dead at the Sphere. I mean, I don't want Tom McGee to hear this, but dinner was great. He
get it.
All right, I'd rather be with you watching the Dead at the Sphere. But he serves on the advisory boards of Headcount and the Center for Real Estate and Urban Analysis at GW, George Washington University, his alma mater. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Matthews Mentality Podcast. And if you're looking to hear more about the future of retail from one of the top leaders shaping the industry, this episode is for you. Stephen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so the 30th year, you said?
Yep.
That's wild. How'd you get into the retail industry?
My dad was in the retail industry.
Okay.
So it's kind of one of those things you get to know. So my dad worked for Macy's pretty much his entire career. And, retail, I learned at a very early age, is a 7-day business.
Yeah, it never
So,
stops.
On Saturdays, you want to spend some time with your dad, it's let's go walk a mall.
I was going to say, what was he doing? Site selection? What was he doing at Macy's?
So he was in operations, Macy's Northeast, started his career, back in the 60s, working his way through the department store business. And so it's just, it's something you grew up with. It's something that we always talked about. Now, I always, thought retail was really fascinating part of the business to me. There was something about real estate. I went to GW, as you said, and I had a real influential professor who had an inaugural real estate course at George Washington that I took. And it was like one of those classes where things clicked.
It clicked.
Understood the math, understood what you had to do in order to drive revenue. Just all the pieces and parts really fit together. And I found myself more interested in the transactional side than the development side, which was really the journey that I've been on pretty much my entire career.
Now, 30 years, retail's, there's been so many, again, I've been in it over 20, so many evolutions, changes, transformations, but let's just talk today. how's retail doing? What are you seeing? What are some of the opportunities, both within the industry in kind of a broader sense, but as a landlord? And then what are some of the threats or concerns or things that, maybe keep you up at night?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. There's the near term view has gotten just narrower and narrower.
Yeah, now it's like it's a 24-hour news cycle,
exactly.
right?
Just the speed at which things move.
Well, yeah, with this administration for sure.
So, I think what we're learning through this is you have to have a philosophy and a strategy and a vision, and you have to execute towards your vision. And you said it, our vision statement for our company is just using insight to inform future of shopping. And essentially what that means is, we're listening to customers, we're listening to our retailer partners, and what makes, this shopping experience new and interesting to them, because we want to be a couple steps out in front. It takes a while to make things happen. So if you're thinking way ahead of, the next cycle, you can at least have be directional and aim towards something. That doesn't mean you can't pivot. So as things start to change, obviously we'll start to pivot a little bit. What I find very interesting is since tariffs have been part of the conversation now for months and months and months, but they really sort of came into light, I would say, the first week of April.
Yeah.
But ironically, what we've seen is traffic building in shopping centers. I mean, April's one of the best traffic months in retail. Forget about Tanger.
That's great.
But in retail.
Yeah.
And even May is, continue to be really strong. So there's a lot of, the customers are basically voting that, we see shopping as more than just picking up necessities. It's really it's entertainment. And, this is something that we like to do, and this is how we want to spend our time.
Yeah, we've seen more so that I can ever recall a decoupling between sentiment and the actual hard data. Like the consumer sentiment, the report that just came out, I think it was last week, was like the worst ever. And yet people are still spending money, right? University of Michigan comes out with their report. It's basically completely decoupled from reality at this point. But the data thus far, I know retail sales, I think the most recent report, it was up month over month. They might have revised the previous month down a bit, but it's still there. Are you guys, speaking of data and consumer insights, how are you, you guys have, you have a big portfolio, you probably get so much data. How are you using that data, or what are you seeing in that data if there's been any pullback? And then how do you use that data to kind of like position your real estate? Because your real estate's there. Like, what do you do to try and protect yourselves to a degree?
Well, look, there's a lot in that word data, so if I'm breaking that apart a little bit, what are the things that are really most interesting to me? The more I can learn about the consumer, I think the better we will be as forecasters in the real estate business.
Sure.
Just getting out of front and looking ahead. So I think about, the data points that are important to me. We've got a loyalty program at Tanger, and it's interesting for a number of reasons. It's a great tool to drive traffic to the shopping centers.
I try not to let my wife know about your loyalty program.
Well,
that beautiful center you have in Antioch.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's a great tool to drive customer engagement, but more importantly, for the loyalty members that opt in, we get to learn a little bit more about them. The way it works is you swipe your credit card in one of our shopping centers, and that data, when you were there, how much you spent, what you bought, we have access to that data. You've opted in, you've given that to us. We know how much you spent. That spend then, results in us giving you points. So I've created a gamified experience for you, but I've also created an opportunity to message you, and now I understand your shopping patterns when you come. So what we're learning, especially, Outlet's always been a business where shop far more heavily on the weekends than it did during the week. But now what we're learning is there's a customer that comes Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, because maybe their second home has now become their primary residence since COVID. Shopping patterns are changing, spends are changing. And we have access to that information through that loyalty program opt-in that allows us to make some really important decisions as to how we market, how we staff, so we can operate far more efficiently, and we can turn on we can turn on the blaster if we need more folks to come in for a particular event or sale that a particular retailer is having.
So Tanger, publicly traded.
Yep.
I'm sure a lot of your job isn't just operating the company, it's communicating to the market why Tanger. why buy the stock? And so what is that message? What, you know, and obviously you're biased, right? But like, why is Tanger a phenomenal stock to purchase and own?
Well, you know, I think since COVID, open air retail has become far more part of the conversation for a lot of consumers, and for a number of reasons. You know, I think that's number one. Number two, we've layered on a whole bunch of different uses to our shopping center. So we're not just, you know, come and shop with us. We're come and dine with us. We're come and be entertained by us.
Yeah.
We're come and enjoy the amenities with us.
It's like come and spend a day with us.
Well, but that's sort of, you know, that going back to that vision statement, that's what the customer is saying they want. You know, it's really hard to compete to get the consumer off the couch. You know, you played football, so you know, it's pretty comfortable to sit at home and watch a football game.
Yeah, it is.
But these stadiums are filled.
Yeah.
What are they doing? You know, and it's the gamification, it's the loyalty, it's the better access, and it's that full rounded experience. So it's not just about the game, it's about all the things that you can do and also go see a game. So I think we've changed the narrative. If we get you to come for the food, but stay for the shopping, or we get you to come for the entertainment and stay for the shopping, we're doing our job. So so when investors are saying why Tanger, we're saying because Tanger understands the consumer and we're evolving with the consumer and we're bringing them the things that they want, because most of the properties that we had that might have been 30, 40, 50 miles away when they were originally built 20 years ago, when the outlet narrative was such that you got to be away from a regional mall because of wholesale issues that the brands would have. Now we are in the centers of the communities that we serve. Those communities are growing. The customer wants to come and visit us. They want to come and visit us more frequently, spend more time when they're there, come for that whole host of uses that we can offer them when they're there. And we're in the early innings of that. So as we continue to develop that muscle, our property will continue to become more and more valuable.
Last question about Tanger. Then I really wanted to kind of dive into your career arc and how you got into this position of being the CEO of a publicly traded company. You know, people talk a lot about now AI, and I'm sure it's becoming, if not already, part of kind of the lexicon. You know, I hear it. There was a chart recently, the number of times CEOs on earnings call mentioned AI, and just up and to the right, you know, in the last 12 to 18 months. And I'm going to make an assumption a lot of that is getting back to the data, but have you guys started to try and incorporate some of these kind of predictive language models and seeing trends, or how has Tanger, or how are you within Tanger leveraging AI to try and put you guys selves in a competitive position?
Yeah. You know, it's the predictive part that's kind of, you know, new and part of the culture now. AI we've been using for years. I mean, obviously there's, you know, AI to have bill payment, AI to manage vacancy and occupancy numbers. So we've been using a lot of that technology, you know, for a number of years now. Now, as we're adapting the predictive piece of it, you know, we become a great data capture company, as I shared with you. And because of that data, you know, we need to be able to think about how to operate our properties more efficiently. So we're using AI to help us think through, you know, what are the show us the arc of consumer traffic. Help us think about what days people are coming. Help us figure out how to message a consumer in a bespoke way that basically says to them, hey, we know you shop Nike and we know you shop Under Armour, and I want to make sure I'm not sending you messaging for Le Creuset, because you'll close that email if I do. So I'm trying to figure out how to get you to open up my emails, how to find value every time you do. And we just think, you know, using all that data and having AI work with us to help predict, you know, what group of folks are going to be best served by integrating with that information, where we'll get the best return on that marketing investment dollar.
Yeah, on the brokerage side, because at Matthews, we're here at our booth at ICSC. We're working on the predictive side, but certainly incorporating it very, very well on the efficiency side. So if I were to call you and said, hey, we actually have this property and we would consider selling, it's time to BOV or time to market or time to create even a 10-year model. I mean, it's, you know, days are hours now, and hours are seconds, you know, hours are minutes. And so we've really done a great job on the efficiency side in terms of the service, but the predictive side we're still working on. But all right, so let me go back in time. Your dad, Macy's Northeast.
Yeah.
So where'd you grow up?
Livingston, New Jersey.
Okay. Is that well? There's
Essex County. It's, you know, basically a bedroom community to Manhattan.
Okay, I was gonna say, like, because there's northern New Jersey and there's southern, and those they almost have two different cultures.
The New York Jet Giant, New Jersey,
I got
not the Philadelphia Eagle, New Jersey.
Yeah, because I was gonna say those are two different things. You brothers, sisters? What was childhood like?
Yeah, two sisters, one older, one younger. I was in the middle.
Your middle child.
Very active family. Everybody was sort of out doing their own thing. My mom worked, my dad worked. So, it's those are back in the days we got on your bicycle when you were 8 years old.
Yeah.
You with 30 cents, you went to Little League, and hung out and had ice cream and watched games.
No
and
iPads
played.
back then, right?
Nah, you had to figure out how to make your own fun.
Yeah.
So, we're always very entrepreneurial growing up, whether we're shoveling driveways, delivering newspapers, having sales, just there was always something to keep ourselves occupied and try and earn some side money.
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah, I was going to ask, would your parents have pegged you as the guy who would go on to, run a publicly traded company? Like, were you always very driven and kind of success minded, or was that something that maybe came on later?
I played a lot of guitar as a kid.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
Well, so I always kind of thought that would be a really fun,
be a rock star,
path.
Yeah.
But, I was a realist too, and I, when you're 16, 17 playing the guitar and all of a sudden somebody's little brother shows up and starts shredding, you're like, maybe, if I haven't figured that out by now.
What was your music inspiration? Like when you went to bed at night, what band or what musician were you like, I'm going to be that guy when you grow up?
Well, look, I found the Grateful Dead at a very early age, I would say.
Yeah.
I just, it's so interesting. The Grateful Dead's such a mystery to so many people because everybody's like, oh, that's hard rock or whatever, because the name might send people in different, but it's a bunch of hippies making great acoustic music and bluegrass music and blues music, from the 60s. And, we're all fans of the 60s music, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Bob Dylan. And so, it's like that whole generation of music really inspired a whole group of us. And so, we had a front row seat for that evolution from acoustic to electric music, with Led Zeppelin in the early 70s and some of those bands that came out. So for me, I sort of followed that journey. I started playing acoustic guitar, really self-taught, just banged away on that guitar. And I just always thought it's a lot of fun if you could just sit there with something on your lap and make all this music.
Yeah.
And I'm not much of a singer, but I, do the best I can.
Well, you're working on it.
I can hold my own. Yeah.
You're working on it. Well, let's give the audience some context because we were talking your career, but now we're talking music. So you play in a band.
I do.
And again, that's not your day job.
No.
But maybe one day.
Well,
right? You learn how to, you keep working on the singing.
I'm enjoying this too much.
Yeah, no, the real estate's done well, but it's okay. So you play in a band and that's kind of your side. That's your love outside of retail.
Yeah. But look, the way it relates, the whole sort of early, transformative, how I sort of saw myself career-wise. I found my way into the transactional side of the real estate business, so brokerage, representing landlords, representing brands, doing real estate transactions. I always thought that was the most interesting part of the leasing side business. On the leasing side.
Okay.
I've always been on the leasing side.
Yeah.
I spent pretty much my entire career as a leasing person. And what's interesting about that is, it's like singles tennis. You're part of a team, but at the end of the day, you're out there. It's like you got to hit. Your serve has to be on point.
There's nowhere to hide.
Your volley has to be on point. So it's one of those jobs where you are the exec. Your job is to execute. And if I knew that was something that I could do, and I say to people, because I hire leasing people all the time. And as I do, there's a couple key things, they always say there's things you can teach people and then there's things that you can't. The teachables, we'll put that aside for a second, but the unteachables, just the ability to talk to people, but to be authentic and genuine. I mean, you have to like people in order to be in the people business.
And you were always a guy that liked business or liked people, excuse me.
Well, it's just, I think that's part of who I am.
Yeah.
It's like getting out in front of people, meeting new people. So somebody said to me once, you collect people. It's interesting. I still have the first friend I ever made just because, it's just, why not? There's always, I'm really good at keeping in touch. We've got a great network of people. I mean, the internet certainly has helped.
Yeah.
But, it's just one of those things where, it's just, that's always been something that's been important to me is, the friendships, the loyalties that you create along the journey. And, you look back on, however many years we've been doing this, over 30. I had breakfast this morning with somebody who I've been doing deals with since I started Ralph Lauren in the early 2000s. But we just have stayed very connected. I just think that that's really important. His son's in the business now. My son's in the business now.
That's crazy.
They've become friendly.
Yeah.
So that whole network is just really amazing.
So you get in the business, you're a leasing broker. What was your, we always talk about early on in a career, there's a very, very consistent theme here with people who end up, running companies today, looking back when they got in the business, there wasn't this concept of work-life balance, right?
Right.
What was your day-to-day like, for the first decade of your career? Were you burning the candle at both ends? And really what was driving you at the time?
I was definitely motivated by accomplishment, more so than motivated by money at the time. Now, my earliest leasing job, I wasn't a broker. I was working for a developer.
Mm-hmm.
So I really controlled the real estate, and you got paid a salary for doing a job. But, it's just, I was always very competitive, and you always wanted to sort of, if they were saying, all right, the competition is who can do the most of these, I always wanted to be the person who could do the most of those. And so, you have to think of innovative ways to do it. It's not about climbing over the others to get there. It's about figuring out a way to, sort of run down another road,
Mm-hmm.
get a lot of things done. And when you're at the finish line looking backwards saying, hey, I got here, I did what I set out to do. So always goal oriented, but always short-term goal oriented. I never had the patience for the long-term goals. Kind of like playing the guitar. When you pick up, you want to learn a song. It's like, if it got too complicated, I'm like, I'll come back to that.
Yeah.
But the easy stuff, you always pick that up really quickly. And that's always been part of, short-term goals, set those goals. Once you set those goals, you can always look back and say, you see, I set that goal, now I can set a longer one. And so that's always been one of sort of the philosophies that live with me is measure my own success, not based on what everybody else is doing, but based on how I set my own goals and try to achieve them. Also, I always found it great to help other people achieve their success too. Because it's not just about, you live and die as a team, and performance is sort of the sum of a lot of individual efforts,
yeah.
but you got to make sure that everybody, sort of gets to the finish line too. So, it's, I guess those who care and have empathy for the people that they're working with, you naturally, rise to a different, sort of a different viewpoint
Mm-hmm.
of the people that you work with. They come to you, they ask you for help. And so, leadership evolves from understanding what it is that you do, walking in the shoes of everybody else and helping everybody, sort of get over the wall together. And, that's always been something I've been, sort of lucky to be able to prioritize.
Well, speaking of success and leadership and those kind of tie together, what was, in your opinion, your first big break in terms of success where you're like, wow, I got this account or I got this promotion, and maybe that subsequently put you in a position of leadership for the first time?
When you're short-term goal oriented, the first one was the first deal I made.
Yeah,
it was really interesting. When I first started my first job, I was like the third person they hired in a year to lease a portfolio of outlet assets.
And the first two hadn't made it.
No, they hadn't. Yeah,
Okay.
They had not.
Okay.
At New Plan Realty Trust. And it was interesting. I was given a book. It was an alphabetized book of, it was the ultimate book of outlet retail tenants. And there are probably about 300 or 400 of them in the book. So the book was handed to me by my boss on day one and said, okay, here's your canvassing guide. Start making calls.
Call from
So
A
I kind of thought
Z.
to myself, would it be interesting, my last name starts with the letter Y. I'm going to start in reverse alphabetical order. Because you got to think that the first person who had the job that lasted 3 months probably made it A, maybe to D, E.
Yeah.
The next guy
I
maybe
wouldn't have
to
thought
G.
of that. I would have
So I'm thinking,
started just today and probably failed.
So I flipped the book over. I started with Z, and it was interesting because it gave me a little bit of a, like a storyline. When I got on the phone with these guys, I'm like, I call a guy from like Zippers Plus, whatever the store was. I'm like, hey, I bet you nobody's called you. He's like, nobody's called me in a week. Yeah. And then, get into the, it was still a no, but, at least.
Just get them talking.
At least you get people talking and you start creating these relationships. The other thing that I thought about, which I thought was kind of interesting, is that, being a broker in real estate or being a salesperson is a lot like being a hitter in baseball. You're not going to hit every single time, but you're going to hit 20, 30% of the time.
Yeah.
So if I'm thinking to myself that for every 10 calls I make, I'm going to get 3 appointments, because that's really what we're looking to do is get appointments. You can't, if you get 7 no's in a row, I was getting progressively more energized, not progressively more depressed.
Because you knew you were that much closer.
Yeah, I knew it was due.
That's a big thing in brokerage.
So it's it's just you have to
ratios.
You have to have that mentality, or you're just never going to make it. So I went Z to A, and I just played the odds, and I got some good connectivity. My first big deal was with Timberland. And, but I had to get to T in order to get there. But I got to T, and Timberland was like, I did 3 deals with them. And I was like, I'm on the map. Now, I told you, short-term goals. So that was, within the first 3-6 months that I was doing it. Obviously, I've set different goals for myself along the journey.
Sure.
But if you're looking for the one that, it's like, wow, I can do this, Timberland.
That was it.
1993.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that was the first, like, where you're like, okay, I think I'm gonna be okay.
Yeah.
Now fast forward, you're at the Gap, then Ralph Lauren.
Yeah.
Like, what was that experience like being on the retailer side, right?
It's really interesting. Same thing.
Yeah.
It's like you're just doing deals from the other side of the. It's like sort of somebody flipped the chessboard on you. Now all of a sudden you're playing from the other pieces. I always felt like I had a leg up working for the retailer because I had that landlord experience.
Mm-hmm.
I understood the hot buttons for the landlord. And it wasn't about being out tactic you, or, I know all the, I know all the blocks to all of the, the punches. I know how to block them. It's just, I understood from the landlord's perspective what was really important for you. And from my side of the transaction, for the retailer side of the transaction, I knew it was important for me. And if we could create a marriage of what's important to you and what's important to me, some of the things that were important to you were easy gives. Yeah. And some of the things that were important to me, if I explained them right, probably would be pretty easy gives for you. So we were able to make a lot of deals. And, it was interesting. I was talking to a couple of people over the course of the last few days since we've been here. What put me on the map at Gap very early on was my territory. And there were 35 real estate reps at the Gap when I was there. Of the 35, I could probably tell you where they all are today. One runs Aritzia Real Estate, one runs Lululemon Real Estate, one runs.
There's a good collection
Williams
of talent.
Sonoma. I mean, the talent is unbelievable.
Wow.
Excuse me. We're everywhere. Really smart people. But one of the things that gave me an early advantage was we were rolling out Old Navy stores. And when I was in the boroughs of New York, which was my territory, looking for locations for these Old Navy stores, I came across a brand that was in all the shopping centers that I wanted to be in. I picked up the phone and called the owner of the brand and said, hey, this is what I'm looking to do. Wound up buying all of his locations.
Wow.
And overnight, turned the lights on almost 15 stores. So, my open to buy was 15 over 2 years. We did it in the first 6 months. Because we asked the question, it wasn't unconventional. Yeah. It just happened to be, hey, you're here. I want to be here. What do you think? It made sense. So, it was a very interesting journey. But as we think about, sort of milestone successes that we've achieved along that journey, that early Gap experience was a great one for me.
And how was Ralph Lauren different than the Gap? Because they're different. Yeah. Brands, certainly. Well, probably different clientele to a degree.
So Gap, I was still very transactional. I was still playing singles tennis. Even though we were all sort of helping each other get across the finish line, I'm still playing singles. When I went to Ralph, there was no real estate department. We were not really a big retail rollout. There was a big outlet presence, but there wasn't a full price presence at the time. And a lot of the international business was all licensed. So, when I was there, the priority was Club Monaco, a new brand from Canada that they had just purchased 2002,
I remember the brand.
2003. Yeah. And, there was a fairly large outlet presence that needed to be managed, leases needed to be renewed, stores needed to be, So, I got into doing these, the Club Monaco deals, which was a lot of fun, street deals, and a lot of the outlet deals. And now the Club Monaco business started to heat up, and Ralph Lauren wanted to do more polo deals. So I needed to hire somebody to come in and help me do the outlet so I could do some of the street polo stuff. And when I brought somebody in, I just remember that transition going from, wait, I'm giving all the fun work away to somebody else. I'm a singles tennis player. And now all of a sudden, I'm not playing doubles. I'm basically managing, the new ace. And that was a really difficult transition for me. To go from the guy that was just tactically been doing deals my whole career. And now all of a sudden it's like, I got to manage somebody who's going to do all the fun work. And I have to, check the spelling on the LOIs.
Welcome to management, baby.
So, it's kind of a player coach. I was running my own deals. We were doing polo deals and some Club Monaco deals. And then what happened was we decided we were going to take back the European business. And so we're going to go from a licensed European business to a, do our own thing,
Corporate
full
one,
price
yeah.
corporate business. So I'm like, okay, I had some success farming out the outlet to, a highly skilled, highly capable person. And I got through the transition. I hired somebody to do the polo deals in the US. Still a little depressed. That was a lot of the fun stuff, the New York stuff, the very Ralph-centric stuff.
Sure.
And then I did the Europe stuff.
Oh, okay.
So I was able to sort of.
That was probably pretty cool. It was different, right?
Yeah, it was. So it was kind of a fun transition for me. I was building a team. I was managing people. I was still on the playing field doing deals. I was changing the geography, and I was cherry picking, the markets that I wanted to work in. So it was a really interesting transition. And I would say 2-3 years, I was able to sort of lose the jealousy of giving the fun deals away.
Sure.
To, hey, look at what this team is accomplishing.
Yeah, look at what you built. Now, so you went, okay, so Gap, Ralph Lauren, and then you went to become the CEO of Simon?
Yes.
The outlet?
Yes.
Before we get to the CEO stage of your career, what, just off the top of your head, I don't know if any one thing stands out. What was a moment of, we talked about that kind of, I'm going to make it moment, or I made it moment, but like, let me flip that. Like, what was maybe the greatest adversity you faced in your career up until the point you got the CEO gig, like where it just rattled you had a failure, or maybe even question like, gosh, am I equipped to do this job? Like, what was there a moment where you just got punched in the stomach?
I would say that probably happened a number of times along the journey.
I mean, you've been in retail, so it's going to.
Yeah, but I'd have to say the transition going from sort of solo Lobo executing deals to managing a team of people, and sort of just saying, okay, you got to let go. You got to let people do their business. You got to give them the opportunity to have these relationships. It's almost, letting your kids get out in the car and drive for the first time. You know that you have to do it, and it's one of those things that you just got to let go. But you still, you're going to worry, and you're going to be like, well, maybe I'll just drive them this one last time. So I think I have to say that was a really interesting transition for me, and it was a lot harder than I probably am making it sound right now. But it was one of those things where you sort of question yourself. It's like, now I'm in this sort of management. I'm really set up for management. And is that something I really want to do?
Are you like a perfectionist with your work, and it's hard to see people do imperfect work? Is like, what is it about giving, kind of giving away, right, or giving up responsibility to elevate yourself? But like, what's the hardest part? I guess the hardest skill for you to develop as a manager? Is it that?
I think part of it it's giving away the relationship. You spent your whole career building a relationship with somebody and said, okay, now you deal with this person, and I'm going to move on and go build another relationship. And as exciting as that sounds, it's still, it's one of those things where, you have to remember, life is long, and you'll figure out eventually you're really not really giving anything up. All you're really doing is, creating all these new partnerships, and you're evolving into this role of connector, which I think is such a critical, place to sit. So, but as I was thinking about, sort of that question, I think that transition was really it was a real difficult one. Not so much like, can I do it? But now all of a sudden, it's like managing the unknown. It's like, now you got to be a little bit more forward thinking. Now you got to set tone, you got to set vision, you got to set, priority for a number of people. And yeah, you question whether or not you're the right person to be doing that at this time.
Have you ever, I'll tell you something that I struggled with, and just, if the answer is no, just say no, right? You don't have to agree with me for the sake of it, is when you get into management and you're coaching people to do something that you used to do, or you gave them those responsibilities so that you could elevate it. In my sense, they don't do it as much, or they aren't as detailed, or the standard of care, or they don't, work as hard at it. And for me, it's always frustrating. Like, why don't they do what I did? And it's like, I guess God makes everybody different. Maybe that's what makes you and them. But like, have you ever struggled with that, of just like, why don't they do it the way I used to do it?
I guess the way I muscled through that was you have to think about scale, and that's one of those things I always think about. It's like the heart surgeon. If the heart surgeon doesn't trust the person who wheel the patient into OR, or the anesthesiologist, or the person who cracks the chest before the surgery, or the person who, then they have to do everything themselves, or you can only do one surgery a day.
No, you're right.
But if you could trust the team, I think that's the thing, you can really scale your business.
No, I agree.
And so you kind of have to get to a place where you have to trust your team. You have to let people have their own style too. I used to remind people along the journey, the way I get through things might not be the way you get through things. I can help you think about how to get through stuff. Like my strategy has always been, let's take the hardest point off the table first. And then the rest of it, sort of makes the rest of the job easier. Or, I would know if I say to you, look, I am not going to do this. I'm not going to give you a radius restriction. I don't care. If I'm Ralph Lauren, I'm just not going to do a deal with a radius restriction. If that's going to kill the deal, let's not waste our time now. And if we go on to the next point, chances are that's not going to kill the deal. So I always like to take the hardest thing off the table first. That's a hard thing for people to do. Yeah. So, I'm not saying that's how you have to do business. Get it done how you're going to get it done. You don't have to, emulate my strategy, my style, but go ahead and, get things done your way. And if I trust you and you've proven that you can get it done, then you're a loyal member, you can stay on this team, and we're going to scale this thing, and we're going to get really big.
Let's talk about the transition to becoming the CEO of Simon, then ultimately Tanger. When did that happen? What was was it just an opportunity you couldn't pass up? Did you feel like it was time for you to actually, go into the C-suite? And, you talked about going from singles to running a team, but running an entire organization. Like, walk us through that process.
So to keep it really just sort of open here, the CEO at Premium Outlets division was really, it was a great title. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I was division president.
Got it. Okay.
So Simon.
It's a great title.
Yeah, great title.
No, because the listener, may or may not. Simon's huge, right?
Right. So look, there's one CEO at Simon.
Yeah.
There are several divisions. I ran a division.
Okay.
So I ran the Premium Outlets division. And as such, I was the operator. My job was to operate that division, leasing, marketing, property operations. That was my role. We integrated with a shared service accounting department. We integrated with a shared service finance department. So all the shared services around the organization, because it was it had so much scale, I got to concentrate all day, every day on those three disciplines, of which I spent 75 or 80% of my time in leasing.
Yeah.
That's how I operated when I was at Simon. We did a great job. We had great product. We had great tenants, amazing team, really, really smart people. And it just, it was actually a pretty fabulous experience and great journey for me. I was trusted by the leadership to come in and run that part of the business. Mm-hmm. It was a great transition for me to go from, sort of that transactional to having more operational responsibility, hiring a lot of people, hiring people with different disciplines, managing people in disciplines that I've never had to manage people before. So in the 5 or 6 years that I was there, it was a really amazing learning opportunity.
What time period was this?
I was there from 2014 to 2020. And so COVID hits.
Yeah.
And,
that whole thing.
Things are up in the air, and, platforms are changing. And, when you have a shared service model, there's a lot of shared service consolidation, and, things were happening. Somewhere around that time, Mr. Tanger, somebody who I've known forever, obviously Gap and my Polo experience, I've done a number of transactions with them. They were looking for a, sort of somebody to succeed him as CEO. And, I got that phone call, and, I thought it was a real interesting opportunity for me because, now that's sort of the transition. I had this great opportunity at Simon at Premium to run a business, run a P&L. Now it's a company. It's a much, now this is a real CEO gig.
Yeah.
Going from a division president, so to speak, into a CEO. And, again, you asked earlier, are you nervous about, does it keep you up at night? Every single night, it's
sure.
Like, what, you never want to bite off more than you can do. Part of you wants to bite off more than you can chew. And the other half of you that keeps you up at night says, did you really do the right thing? But it was a really exciting opportunity at a very interesting time. I mean, think about this, right? 40 shopping centers, 15 million square feet, 3,000 stores, and they're all closed the first day I walked into the office. to start the job. I actually didn't walk into the office. I walked into my little into like a little bedroom with a computer.
Man, that's
'cause
why.
we're
So
all online.
what was your first day there?
My first April 10th, 2020.
Yeah, I mean that is like
In the heart of it.
in the heart
of it.
When did you know you were going to take the job? Was that before COVID, during? Like, I mean, because that COVID was like what, late February, early March, like when it was really hitting New York.
Yeah. I would say March. It's a little bit of a blur, but somewhere somewhere in that mix, somewhere between being
that's
being
a crazy
home
that's a crazy time
Yeah, it was an
for
interesting
everyone,
time.
let alone that type of career, that a new job with that big of a job, right?
What was interesting was the stock had traded fairly low at the time.
Yeah.
It's like
You had a lot of
up.
well, and it has
It
it
had
has
some
a
good real
lot.
estate.
I don't remember where it was, but I think it was what $30-31 right around like
Yeah.
it. But it was it's
Single digits.
yeah.
But I think everybody had lost a lot of share. at that
Good
point.
timing, right?
That kind of weighed into the decision making a little bit. I knew the players, having been their biggest tenant for a number
Sure.
of years. Knew Mr. Tanger
You knew the
extraordinarily
space,
well.
yeah.
I knew the space, I knew the properties, knew the challenges because I was running the competition. So I knew the challenges that they had. But what I didn't know, and I think what we pivoted into really quickly once the lights came back on and people started to get back out, was the importance of open air, the importance of variety, the importance that the shopping experience, some of the things I just shared with you earlier, but that whole vision of that people are looking for more reasons than just shopping when they decide to get off the couch into their cars and go someplace. And so we realized very early on, driven by the fact that 1 million square feet of stores didn't open post-COVID. They were just like, thank you very much, we're out of here. They used, COVID they used it for an exit. They just said, we're not turning the lights back on ever. We filled that space with different uses. It wasn't just about finding the next outlet user. It was about finding the next restaurant that wanted to be in an outlet environment, or the next, entertainment use that wanted to be an outlet environment. So it really gave us the opportunity to be a lot more creative.
What are your personal drivers, your motivations today, and how have those evolved, over the course of your career? Like what gets you up in the morning today, and maybe how has that changed over time?
So, today, look, you wake up this morning, you're going to ICS, you're going on the floor. Yeah. And, to me, I think this is probably the most exciting place to be on the planet right now. You always think about wherever you are, how does that rank? Whether, you're traveling with your family on some really cool vacation, it's like, there's no place I'd rather be. I would say, in our business, this is it, right?
Yeah.
The energy is unbelievable. The floors are crowded. It's a lot of faces that you've seen over the years. People have, you hear about people who have gone from, this company to that company, same person, different job. You think about the new opportunities and the things, how you can leverage some of those relationships that you have to help move your business forward. If you've got, curiosity about the retail business, you can walk around the floors here and look at new uses and new things that people are doing, which is kind of exciting. So that gets me excited. I'm genuinely curious. It's not like, oh my God, I got to read another paper. I'm like, I always like to be the first person to know what's going on. So I think, to me, that's a lot of fun. And now, in this role, it's not just leasing and operating and managing. It's, owning the, it's like the investor relations side of the business, which is a whole new thing. Yeah,
that's all totally different.
It's getting on earnings calls every quarter.
Oh yeah,
and sort of throwing it all out there,
preparing for them.
And the prep work. What's interesting about preparing for an earnings call, if you're in your business every day and you know what's going on, the prep it's gotten less and less burdensome.
Sure.
As we've been doing more and more. And don't forget, they happen every quarter. And they're like waves. They just keep coming.
Yeah. And by the time you're like, oh, I'm done with it, you're like, wait, there's another one coming up.
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't have that problem. But yeah, that's got to be pressure packed. Cause like if in theory, it's our business is not this dramatic, but like if you say the wrong thing or you don't have the answer the analyst is looking for.
You're right.
You
hope you've got a good news story. You hope you've got something important to share. You hope your business is running in the right direction. Thankfully, occupancy has been great.
Yeah.
There's a lot of tenant demand. One of the great backstories is there's not a lot of new retail being added into the, into the
No,
country.
I think it was net negative over the last 10 years in terms of GLA.
So I would think because a lot of stuff is being removed, but just because there's not a lot of new things that are competing with your existing stuff, so you don't sort of have that, in the blind spot to worry about. So, when I sit with our leasing team, especially, one of the things we always say to one another is our space is more valuable today than it was yesterday because there's less of it. There's more retailers that want to be in it. We've done a really good job of, elevating and mixing the uses up. So it's not necessarily outlet retailer competing for outlet space. I can lease it to anybody.
Yeah.
And outlet retail's evolved. I was with a brand this morning who's talked about having 40% of their inventory is excess, 40% of their inventory is stuff that they're making to put in the outlets, and 20% is full price. So 40, 40, 20 is the new merchandising mix in the outlet business. And I think that that's fascinating. I love that. I embrace that. I think that the customer should never leave a store disappointed. Hence, made for. I think there's always going to be a customer who's looking for newest, latest, greatest, hence full price. And I think there's always going to be a customer that's going to come into one of our shopping centers looking for product that maybe they saw once before. It could be last year's product, but the quality, the brand, they love it so much. They're a fan. They just want to buy in the best possible value. And that's, that excess inventory piece of it. So it's a really fun shopping experience for the consumer because of that.
We were talking about ICSC, you've been coming in 30, 22. Like, what advice would you have for young professionals? I don't just mean in real estate or retail. I mean, just in general, based on your experience, based on your career, based on what you've learned, but also based on what you've seen as you've managed a lot of younger professionals, kind of looking to develop and grow within their industry. Like, what advice would you have for younger people say, hey, I want to be a CEO one day of a publicly traded company? Don't do it. No. I want to be the CEO of a big company one day. Like, what have you seen to be common things, characteristics, traits, skills that people have or should develop? And I'm going to ask that question in the reverse. Like, what are some of the things that you've seen consistently kind of hold people back from achieving what they want?
Well, look, for me, just because I spent 30 years on the transactional side of the business, I was very fortunate to come up through never the expectation that I was going to be the CEO of the public company. And honestly, it wasn't really a goal because I really enjoyed the transactional side. I thought the job I had at Ralph Lauren, running a global real estate group, growing stores and restaurants and hospitality, I mean, that was a pinnacle. That was an unbelievable, what a great job. When the other opportunities came along, it was sort of like, I really want to leave this Ralph Lauren job. It's so great.
Yeah.
I loved every day.
Did you get to go to Europe a lot? And all
cool. There's a lot of fun stuff. And,
it's,
if you think about all the things that Ralph Lauren is involved in and that you get to participate in, it was a lot of fun. And look, I'm thankful that I had sort of the drive to sort of do the next thing. But, I always look back incredibly fondly on the relationships that I created when I was there, the global relationships. But, what's interesting, we just added a new board director, Sonia Singhal, who came. She worked for Gap for a long time. She was actually CEO of Gap before she left Gap around COVID time, or maybe just slightly after. And now she's on our board of directors. And during our sort of getting to know you early stages of her being on the board, she said something very interesting to me. Just having she being a sitting CEO for as many years as she had been. She said, sitting CEOs need to do a couple of things. And the most important is only do things that you can do. Things that other people in your organization could do, you need to trust those people and hand those things off and let them do that thing. And it's interesting because, you asked about what holds people back. What might hold them back is trust, or the fear of giving up the thing they love, like my transition going from, sort of the singles tennis player to this team, managing a team. But the other side that she said that I thought was really interesting, but don't give up the one thing that you really love, because that's what energizes you. That's what keeps you waking up every morning. That's what gets you fired up to be in this business. And that, for me, that's leasing. So, I preside over a deal committee. To the extent that I can be helpful for the leasing team. I'm here at ICSC sitting in on leasing meetings. I've said to our investment group, guys, you gotta, you guys can have your investor meetings over here, but this is a leasing meeting. This is ICSC is about leasing, as far as I'm concerned. So I'm going to stay as connected to leasing as I can because that's my roots, that's my heritage, that's where I come from. But I'm also going to be able to stay out in front of our business where I need to be because I have the trust of the team that we've built here, that they're going to run with the things that I know that they're going to specialize with. I think I have the best operator in the business. I have the best head of leasing in the business. I've got the best CFO in the business. I got the best general counsel. Our marketing team, we had we won 6 or 7 ICSC marketing awards last night. Won the best of the best ICSC marketing award. I was there front row watching the whole. It was great.
Oh, that's cool.
So it's nice to be rewarded for the hard work that you do. We do it for each other, and the team culturally we all seem to get along really well. And, we move together really well as a team. But I think that the spirit of our leadership is do the things you can do and trust your team to get the rest done. And that trickles down throughout the entire organization. And I think that helps build a lot of trust, gives people chances, gives people the opportunity to make some decisions along the journey. And they don't have to live in sort of this environment where I don't know if this is the right thing or the wrong thing. So now I'm frozen and I can't make a move. So what keeps us moving forward is that, that lack of fear in the organization that people can actually make some decisions and do their jobs.
So you've given that advice to the audience. You mentioned a piece of advice that a board member gave you. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given in your life, or in your career, I should say?
In my career,
or in your life,
Well, look, I'll go back to career first. When I worked for New Plan Realty Trust, I went on an interview with a guy named Arnold Laubish, who's like a legend in this business. Ran New Plan. He was the COO. Very early REIT in the business. And I sat for my interview with him and he asked me a question. I think at the time he handed me a stapler and he said, "Sell me the stapler." And I said, "You want to buy a stapler?" And he said, "No." I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" And he shut the whole sale down. And he looked at me and he goes, "You're the worst salesperson I've ever met in my entire life." He goes, "But that I can teach. I can teach you in 2 seconds how to be a great salesperson. The rest you got to, all the things we talked about, the things you can teach and the things you can't teach." He goes, in the interview, what came through was the things that I had the things that I couldn't teach, but he was willing to teach me. So I was like, "Are you gonna teach me how to sell?" So you never ask a yes or no question in sales.
Yeah, open ended.
He says, once you give somebody the opportunity to say no, you're done.
Yeah, close ended is yes or no. Open ended.
So it's like, so I'm like, "Well, how should I have done it?" He goes, "Hey, it's great to see you. I want you're here to buy staplers. Did you want 50 or 100?
Yeah, that's good.
100. Did you want blue or green?
Yeah.
Green. You want me to ship them to you? You're going to come and pick them up. Great. Here's the envelope." All of a sudden I bought stapler. I think I left the interview with a stapler in my hand.
Probably.
But that's just little things like that you learn along the journey. And that one to me was really important. In fact, every once in a while I get to go to, some universities, ask me to come in and speak to kids, and about whether it's real estate or transactional real estate, whatever it is they want to talk about. But I usually get asked a question similar to that. And I say, "Okay, I'm going to make sure you guys all leave here slightly better salesmen than you came in." I usually take them through that story.
Everybody's in sales. Everybody. Even whether you know it or not. You're selling real estate, you're selling staplers, you're selling your boss and why you should get the promotion or get the raise or whatever. Everybody's in sales. All right, last question for you. Is there been a resource that's been valuable to you? And it could be a book, it could be a seminar. Is there something that's helped you develop as a person or a professional that you could share with the audience? Something that you've kind of leaned into or learned from?
So interesting. I've like 5 or 6 great things that have popped into my ear.
Well, you could tell us 5.
So well, first of all, let's start with ICSC.
Yeah.
I think ICSC has really given a lot of us the opportunity to get together on an annual basis, several times, to reacquaint with contacts that you've developed over the year, meet new people.
Across industries, it would be organizations. How would I not trade organizations, but like get involved in industry organizations. Yeah.
Okay. So if I'm advising somebody on how
because we have a pretty
things,
broad audience at this point.
Understood.
Yeah.
So I would say, trade organizations are great because there's a lot of like-minded people in the room
networking,
that are all thinking about your business similarly.
You have that in common,
business, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's one thing you have in common. I do a lot of reading. I love Women's Wear Daily. I think that's critically important for our business. You understand who's doing well, who's not doing well. And it's not necessarily, the headline isn't, tariffs. The headline is how Louis Vuitton's reacting to tariffs. How's Walmart reacting to tariffs? So it's sort of the second derivative.
You didn't hear Besson said Walmart's going to eat the tariffs, No, we'll see.
We'll see how that plays out.
We'll see.
But the point is, it's the second derivative of the thesis, and you can sort of understand how other retailers are thinking, how are developers thinking, how landlords thinking about it. So I find Women's Wear Daily, especially in the fashion and in the retail business, is really critical. Just something that I read pretty much daily. I watch CNBC. Everybody has CNBC up all day.
Oh yeah.
I've been very lucky. I've been on CNBC a couple of times.
Yeah.
Everybody always say to me, "Oh, I saw you on CNBC." And I'm like, "Did I sound smart?" They're like, "Who heard you? The volume's off." Because everybody watches with the volume.
It's so true. We have it in our office. We have CNBC on some, then we have Bloomberg on some. But you can never really hear. But no, hey, you look good. So
it's like, you waved.
Yeah.
So I think there's so much information out there. I'm constantly in search of unbiased information. I don't want left leaning. I don't want right leaning. I really want to understand, right down the fairway, what's going on. And I think the great trade publications really are very helpful.
Yeah, I agree.
I listen to a lot of earnings calls, REIT earnings calls, particularly because that's the space I'm in.
Yeah.
I want to understand how my REIT counterparts are thinking about the business and things that they're, what they're reacting to. Challenges that they're having, we find that we all sort of, we're swatting at the same flies.
Yeah.
So it's been, it's been a lot of fun. And then, look, have a hobby, have something that just,
play the guitar.
Well, just whatever it is, just lean into it. It's like, you got to make sure that you have a little bit of downtime. And when you do, if you can, advance yourself as a hobbyist in some way, I think that's one of the things that just keeps it real. That's what, you always say to yourself, this is what I'm doing it for, So if I can find, an hour and I'm sitting down, I'm playing the guitar, or the band is up on stage someplace and there's a lot of people hanging out listening to us.
Where can we watch you play?
Yeah, so I play every year, Red Lion. We usually play during the New York ICSC. It's just happened to have been a show that we've been doing for the last 20-something years.
All right, I'm going to check you out this time.
Yeah, we play all over the place. But, it's just one of those things that, it's like, this is what we're doing it for.
Yeah, you really enjoy it. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on. I know ICSC it's a very valuable, very busy conference. I'm sure your schedule is very tight. So I thank you for the time. It's fascinating, especially right now. It's, what is it, mid-May, and so much talk about tariffs and trade wars and really the effect it's going to have on the economy. And so much of our economy is consumer spending driven. I think it's like 70%. And so sales and consumer sentiment now more than ever has been, at top of mind to everyone. And you guys at Tanger, and you specifically, you're going to, you have the data, and it'll be fascinating to see how that all plays out. Hopefully, the actual data continues to stay stronger than the sentiment. I think the sentiment's a little more up and down than probably the reality of how it all plays out. But yeah, just can't thank you enough, and congrats on all your success, and look forward to continued success. So thank you for joining.
Thank you. It's really been an honor.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Steve.